Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas. Actually, am I?
Yes, you're on screen. Matthew's with us, and we're answering your questions.
It wasn't originally going to be an answering questions episode.
The things which people have asked us to talk about are not necessarily the things which we're very qualified to talk about. When we were discussing some of the stuff that's come up, I was saying it's a little bit like when they asked Martin Heidegger what he thought about the moon landing. You know, Professor Heidegger, what do you think about the moon landing?
Do you know what he said?
He said, I found it very frightening.
That sounds good. I think that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
If we could come up with responses
Yeah.
of that quality, I would be extremely pleased.
Yeah.
And surprised.
Yeah. The kind of intention was to try to delve a little bit into the hard to define contemporary moment. Sometimes it seems, I don't know if this is just a sort of 21st century thing. You know, sometimes it feels like time is standing still. Sometimes it feels like it's going very fast. You know, it's sometimes like the cultural moment sometimes seems like a kind of endless and slightly parodic reiteration of things which have been happening over and over and over again for about 100 years now. But
and it's difficult to know to what extent that's always the case.
yeah,
It's definitely more true sometimes than others. And also, if the relationship between looking back at culture that happens, where you can see it in the rounds, and there's been quite a lot of sorting going on, and it actually being a real phenomenon.
How to capture the zeitgeist in a bottle, or at
Yeah.
least in a podcast episode. We're definitely not going to succeed.
no.
But-
So we're asking today, where is the now?
And we should also say,
It's a podcast called About Buildings and Cities. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Gingell.
and I'm Matthew Lloyd Roberts.
Where we are, it's December 2024. And should we just kick it off? So
Yeah.
we've got a comment from Miles Garrod, who's one of our subscribers on Patreon. Shall I read it out?
Yeah, let's read out the whole thing
Okay,
and then we can
here
pass
goes nothing. We're maxing on pluralism, eclecticism, and continuing to wane on Manifestos' teleology movements. We're waxing on decorated sheds and waning on ducks. Tendencies towards integration and continuity are advancing. Gables with eaves are totally publishable again. Everything feels a little bit more fun and less self-serious. Another thought, visiting London in 2011, there was an exhibit on Zaha titled something like The Future of Architecture. That seemed unlikely but possible to my younger self. It seems funny now. Okay, yeah. Okay, so like pluralism, decorated sheds, and fun. So this is really talking about kind of what contemporary design is like. Yeah, I think that it's sort of true of certainly like cool architects today. I mean, there are different strains, aren't there? And I think we'll kind of get into these a little bit, but we're definitely in a moment where people are being a little bit more historicist again, or they're certainly being like a little bit more consciously, like a lot of the presentation of the designs is certainly a bit more erudite. There's quite a lot of play with kind of reference, a little bit of vernacular, a little bit of kind of turning over interesting but just sort of obscure enough kind of significant projects from the late 19th, early 20th century sometimes. One of the things that has come up in some of the other comments is like, are people doing POMO back? And it's not really POMO because it's not really against the background of modernism. It doesn't have any of the kind of...
I mean, some of it's POMO of modernism.
Well, I mean, what do we think about waning on Manifestos, teleologies and movements?
Well, I don't know about that because I think that the other sort of strains are definitely sort of available to Manifestos. Like I think that the kind of ecological strain in architectural rhetoric at the moment is very manifesto-y, and in fact like very consciously manifesto-y. There's a lot of, you know, like here's the working group, here's the alliance, we're talking about what you know, here's our communique.
The nature of the manifestos, I would say, has changed. So before you could credibly have manifestos that were aesthetic,
Yeah.
or we're going to build in this style, or aesthetic technological. The modern thing is going to bring things forward, or the structural approach is going to make it humane, and so and so and so. Whereas now there are lots of manifestos, but it's really political. It was always political, but I would say there's an awful lot of politics first talk. I mean, I guess climate's probably the biggest one, but by far not the only one. But in a way, it feels like that's kind of taking over from a lot of the discussion of styles.
I don't know. I guess there's Thomas Heatherwick. That's a manifesto. Heatherwick's humanise,
I haven't
subsidise, capitalise. You know, well, I haven't read it. I'm resisting reading it because everything I've heard about it makes it sound very stupid. But
that wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
I've dipped my toe into it, and it's funny how much of it is a sort of reheating of the Prince Charles 1980s agenda, vision of Britain, kind of anti-modernist, faux populist backlash stuff. Yeah, but it is so much intellectually thinner.
Yeah.
Even than that was, and that was extremely intellectually thin to begin with. But even more so, there's a sort of he's leaning into the kind of, I'm going to build a machine that measures eye movement, so that when I show you a picture of a building, it will read your eye movement in such a way that will tell me whether or not it's a good building.
That feels like something that should have been in the Millennium Dome.
That's still hanging around. Yeah, there's still the like mixture of kind of conservative aesthetics, slightly like paranoid revisionist history, and a little bit of like neuroscience bollocks is a thing which people have been trying in different configurations for a long time, and every so often, they get an article into Business Insider about it or whatever. It does happen. But just to return to the like manifesto, that's one of the things which makes the present moment feel like it's stuck in a kind of endless repetition, because are we really still talking about making a manifesto against Le Corbusier, a person who was born 150 years ago?
And hasn't had influence of hegemonic influence in architectural education or like anywhere for at least 50 years.
He died in the 1960s. This was a very long time ago now.
But he was dethroned quite a long time before he died. Everyone said, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah, but we're still doing, I mean, and it's not just quote unquote charlatans like Thomas Heatherwick, who
allegedly, alleged charlatan Thomas Heatherwick.
Well,
who do this kind of thing. Like,
doesn't lie in writing,
but like everyone.
Big moves guy,
where you come across kind of gauche sort of manifesting on design, on questions of design, or on kind of modernity, like the tropes of the 1920s still sort of come up as if that were what the 2020s needed to arrange themselves against it, and it all seems, I don't know, it all seems very, very bizarre and sort of performative. So yeah, I mean manifesting is definitely around. In the
future, I would love to comment on that properly.
There doesn't seem, I don't think that it's very difficult as an intelligent person to have a manifesto about design, specifically about design and aesthetics and style in the present moment. But I mean, there is obviously something to talk about, like the fact that most modern buildings are quite horrible is undeniably a thing, and it's something which it would be good to try and kind of figure out. And in some way, I think that the rationalizations for that are offered are often, on the spectrum between sort of psychotic, clearly self-serving, or just extremely stupid. And it's got to be possible to say something a bit more meaningful about that.
Ducks versus decorated sheds.
I don't think that's true. No, I think we're in a duck era.
Oh, you think so? I think there are a lot of decorated. Like if you just scroll through an architectural website, there are an awful lot of tasteful boxes with like nice textured brick patterns on them.
Yeah.
Or an awful lot of things with slightly chamfered off edges, and people are. I mean, it may be that it's always true.
I don't know. I guess it depends on. I think we've got a definitional sort of issue, don't we? Because like this is an era of.
I mean, ducks versus decorated sheds is a reductio ad absurdum. Yeah, it is a deliberate provocation that we're using as a framing device.
What makes it a duck? I think. Obviously, we're in a kind of an era of like facade design and complex assemblies. So does that make it a decorated shed, or does the kind of the sort of highly integrative nature of it make it more of a duck? Like my feeling about the decorated shed is that the decoration is a sort of like kind of quite autonomous layer, and the thing underneath it has a kind of arbitrary relationship to it.
I think the framing device was designed to. He wasn't interested in ducks at all. He was only interested in decorated sheds.
Yeah,
and it was designed to make the decorated shed quite capacious. I guess the ideal decorated shed actually is one that doesn't even have a decorated facade. It just has a sign on top.
Yeah. It's difficult. Yeah, how are we even taking the temperature of what's going on? Like, I mostly go on I get suggested things by the Instagram algorithm. I think this is my primary method of discovery for finding new contemporary architectural stuff going on. I don't think I'm the only one. I mean, which is obviously a bit, and sometimes I check what's won the Mies van der Rohe Prize or whatever.
I mean, Twitter for a long time was a good kind of accumulator of things and moods and modes, but it's no longer its old self, and people are quite rightly leaving it behind them. Where do you think students get references from? Was there a moment somewhere on either side of the 2010s where there was a kind of like unitary discursive like pot, and the kind of breakdown and the fracturing of various kinds of internet systems means that we don't really live in a big forum anymore, and instead it's much more discreet and broken down?
When I was studying, I would say there were the things that are going on now, which is sort of political things, and there were things that are going on now, which is like, let's do buildings well.
Yeah.
As in, let's build nice boxes with well-arranged rectangles.
Yeah, I want to be a Swiss architecture practice based in London.
Yeah.
Which is still, and lots of my contemporaries doing that.
And there was also, though, some things which are definitely dead. There was parametricism, as in we're going to do computer blob texture with the beginning of self-design, or combined with a sort of graphical sensibility, which is like the world starts off as black and is illuminated by everything being of light.
Yes.
And then in the dark, into the darkness, things swirl, and you've got to think about the third dimension.
Yes, the demiurge, aka grasshopper.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get into it, and you're like, this is so the opposite of that. It's really like, okay. I mean, I quite like parametric drawing.
Yeah.
I actually think parametric drawing is a really nice discipline, and I just wish you could persuade builders to build where you put the window defined by constraints, where you set out. Like, could you do it this far off the wall, and then where it fits between these two things, please? Which is what parametric modeling is, like, this far off that thing, and then this big. And that died.
Yeah.
That was dying in 2006.
This is one thing that Miles is saying in the comment, right? He's saying that he went to in 2011, he went to a exhibition about Zaha that was called The Future of Architecture, or subtitled or something like that.
Yeah.
And he could just about believe it at the time, but it seems laughable now.
Yeah. We're going to talk about neon, but like there is a whole rush of kind of that kind of stuff being built in neon.
The now is definitely not here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nows going on in Asia in different bits of it.
Yeah, the now of here definitely feels very fun, contextual, a little bit colourful, interesting things with materials, quite like either historicist or kind of certainly pretty erudite.
Is that because it's playing off against the reality that's so boring? Yeah,
and like quite sort of overrepresented, like a very high proportion of PR drawings to budget, and kind of quite social media facing,
Yeah.
That seems to be where the zeitgeist of certainly sort of local cool practice that I'm aware of is. Should we go on to another
Next one?
Yeah, great. Well, dear friend of the podcast, Susan Yelovich.
Oh yes.
Commented on Instagram asking
and beloved patron.
Thank you very much. Asking if we had any thoughts about wood generally, the preponderance of wood as a sort of design aesthetic, and specifically about Kengo Kuma.
So Kengo Kuma, I wonder what project in particular it is. Kengo Kuma has a really funny sort of narrative arc as an architect, because the really early Kengo Kuma buildings are these kind of surreal Pomo buildings in isn't it him who has that one in Japan where the building is an enormous column capital? And then latterly he's kind of completely reformed, and he's become, his whole sort of design principle is about the definition of one beautiful detail, and the building is created out of the kind of three-dimensional duplication of one beautiful detail, often in wood, but also, like V&A Dundee is the sort of kind of composite stone or something. Like it can really be anything, but they are all, even the ones which aren't wood, are a kind of analogy for wood in terms of the detailing. They look like a kind of a sort of a structure based on the principle of wood. I don't know.
Wood more generally, there's been for a while now a big embodied carbon related push towards cross-laminated timber, mass timber framed buildings, which has produced a very tasteful tendency. There's a lot of it in Scandinavia, but also
lots in France.
Lots in France. And it's just starting to creep around the edges of the British construction industry vaguely. I went round a tour of Woolworth Town Hall, which has been in South London, which has recently been renovated after a big fire 10 years ago. Southwark Council operating the way that it does, by Fikes and Merlin architects.
They got around to it eventually.
It's all new spans with cross-laminated timber, big chunky structural CLT.
Yeah.
So that is definitely, there's definitely a carbon, an aesthetics of low carbon architecture that's here.
The Kengo Kuma approach is, in a way, more like sort of Zumthor or something. It's kind of elemental.
Yeah.
But the elements aren't mega monolithic often. I've only been to a couple of his buildings. Quite fine, I remember.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, slightly dematerializing through the detail.
Materials can have meanings, and they can also just be materials.
Yeah.
I can remember a while ago you showing me someone had done a research project where they built a series of houses out of one thing.
Oh yeah. The Florian Nagler research houses, simple building houses. Yeah.
Yeah, and and for that it felt like it was exactly this phenomenon where you're combining a material like a metaphor, where the material has a sort of psychic meaning, which is very appealing. It's aesthetically exciting.
Yeah.
It's aesthetically exciting to have a really pure message, and then combining that with that excitement with a politics of, I guess, climate politics or energy politics, where it's this pure aesthetic experience will produce a climate solution.
Yeah.
Which is a really classic political thing to do, which is the thing that you feel, your emotion.
Yeah.
Can be channeled into an obvious solution to a technical problem.
We're kind of going round the roundabout again on various things, in some ways we're back in the domain of objectivity, Sachlichkeit, this kind of idea that the materials need to speak about themselves and need to speak about the present moment, although instead of speaking about the kind of the excitement of the technological age to come, instead they're talking about, they're an image of sucking the carbon out of the air or whatever. And there's you're definitely right, Matt, that there's a kind of literal process of, you can do a whole life carbon analysis of the building, and then you can kind of optimize a little bit, certainly as a kind of spreadsheet exercise. We'll have this kind of windows and we'll do this, and all of this kind of gets the budget down a bit. But then there's the level of, how do you make that actually legible? How do you make that something which can be communicated? The communication of that, the moment where you try to turn the kind of ecological reality, however constituted, into architectural language, is really slippery. What you find is that those kind of buildings go out of date super fast on a kind of symbolic level. So if you go back a little bit, the kind of high-tech and late high-tech iteration of this was you had all of these kind of bioclimatic sections, and you tried to have the building so that it sort of looked like a diagram of kind of stack effect ventilation. And all of that stuff now looks incredibly dated, and it's not talking about anything ecological anymore. And
do you think all of it? I went to Bordeaux not that long ago and looked at the Bordeaux courthouses, which is a really classic example of that. These big eggs sitting in a big wooden egg sitting in a big, and it is incredibly demonstrative, and it's quite fun because it's right next to this quite this famous sort of neoclassical bit, which is the old bit.
Yeah,
it felt periods, but it didn't feel like this is irrelevant.
Okay, well, maybe
to me, like it's still. I think partly because it's these big wooden eggs.
Yeah, the wood I think probably helps it a bit. But like the state of the art of that has shifted so far from. It used to be that it was all about, the kind of up and coming thing was to really think about the operational energy of the building, and now the thing is to think about the kind of carbon budget of the materials, and that actually leads you to focus on completely different things. So
which is funny because certainly historically, carbon consumption of buildings was very, very heavily in their use. That will have shifted over time.
Yeah,
but it's still probably quite a lot in their use.
Not if you look at the whole lifespan.
Yeah,
across
it depends
the,
how
across
long
the coming
till you knock it down.
60 years, because you model the fact that the carbon emissions of the energy trends towards zero. My understanding is that now, when you model these things, they come out more or less even, or even slightly towards the materials in the construction as the biggest element of the budget.
Which is presumably because the materials in construction are produced now, whereas the future we're going to have sold everything. So if we built the same building in the future, at any point in the future, the building that wouldn't be true of, but it's just because our carbon intensity is going down over time.
If only we could build the building at the end of its lifespan rather than the beginning, it would really solve a lot of the problems. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So we shouldn't do the thing.
Now,
basically. So basically, actually, probably the thing to do in that situation is not really don't bother building performant buildings at all.
Yeah,
just live as you are.
Yeah,
but you have put all the effort into
you have to build it. You have to I know. You have to build it now. I mean, anything which can give rise to architectural form is sort of exciting for architects, So architects will always have a preference for things which give rise to some sort of legible formal logic, because that's the language they speak, They're always going to prefer evaporative cooling over, MVHR, because one of them is invisible and in the fabric of the building, and one of them allows you to design this big, exciting looking lobby.
Cooling chimney.
Even though doesn't really work, but so that's the dilemma. I mean, that's the dilemma. Like, fundamentally, the architects are in the business of trying to speak through architectural form, and the translation exercise is a bit fraught.
Cool.
Let's do
next thing.
Yeah,
a little news story which was sent in by a dear friend of the show, Sai. The Sainsbury Wing, by Venturi Scott Brown of the National Gallery, they're doing some work to it, and they have decided to take out a column which was originally part of the sort of foyer bit, non-structural column.
Was it the ones that are downstairs?
I think they're not even that far back. I think the one, it's like, it almost like is at the entrance to the gift shop, like kind of cuts through the circulation as you go in. Anyway, when they were taking this column apart, there was a letter stashed away inside from Lord Sainsbury, the patron of the building, which read, "To those who find this note, if you have found this note, you must be engaged in demolishing one of the false columns that have been placed in the foyer of the Sainsbury Wing of the National Gallery. I believe that the false columns are a mistake of the architect, and that we would live to regret our accepting this detail of his design. Let it be known that one of the donors of this building is absolutely delighted that your generation has decided to dispense with the unnecessary columns." From Lord Sainsbury.
I think massive respect to Lord Sainsbury for doing that. I think it's objectively an extremely funny thing to do, and I think
probably he's right.
Yeah,
but even if he was wrong, I think it would be a good thing. I mean, I think there's been some rich people who give money to buildings shouldn't get to be able to comment on them.
Yeah,
and I think that's extremely weird at Po-Face.
Yeah,
I mean, he didn't get to choose it.
There
was a lot of controversy around the refurbishment of the Sainsbury Wing, and I've never been a fan of that entry sequence, and it seems like among the various things that the building does, which are of like real value and architectural significance, I think the design of that ground floor really isn't one of them. There's obviously the big staircase with the curtain wall. There's the kind of snail shell plan upstairs, and there's the facade. And those are the really key things. And to the extent that, like, doing anything to any of those feels like it would be kind of bad news. But I think, like, I just didn't see the problem with this. And
actually, the rest of the building is quite weak.
Yeah, the downstairs temporary
in a
exhibition
way, the
galleries
difficult bits, which is like you've created a big box, the difficult bits, which are kind of the inside of the box, are bad, and the relatively easy bits, which is you prioritised a grand circulatory staircase. That's the right thing to do, and it's good. Although I don't really like the archy things at the top.
No, they're silly, detail. But there you go.
And then the gallery at the top, which is like, okay, we're going to prioritise this.
Yeah,
a good layout of a top lit gallery.
Yeah, with nice big sort of columns and a funny sort of game about scale and perspective, which all seems very thematic. Yeah, there are some bits which are a bit phoned in, like the downstairs, but the lower ground floor with the temporary exhibition galleries.
Yeah, the cafe and the.
It's just lame. I just don't think they did that bit very well. And don't.
I would strongly recommend, if anybody gets the chance, there's a documentary that's just newly out, hot off the presses, called Stardust, which is about Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, footage shot by their son in the noughties, and then has been edited and put together into a kind of comprehensive story. Touches on lots of really interesting themes, the nature of the partnership, the way in which Denise Scott Brown's contributions have been sort of overlooked or underwritten, or the fact she wasn't on the Pritzker nomination, which was a point of some contention between the two of them, and or that he'd been offered I didn't know this, but he'd been offered the Reba Gold Medal and turned it down because they wouldn't put her name on it. So there's some interesting stuff. And it's just a really good documentary, and it's especially funny to watch them in their kind of older age, like going round and walking round. It's very funny when he's walking across Trafalgar Square and he looks at the posters that the National Gallery have put up in front, and he says, "How dare they put those in front of the best facade of the 20th century?" It's kind of, I can sort of megalomaniacal, and I can understand why Lord Sainsbury put this letter in
I think the thing with the letter is, I think we should be really in favour of people taking strong positions on architecture and prominent people doing it, and also being funny about it. I'm just so in favour of engagement that's not just people going yang yang yang.
Yeah.
And this is beyond going yang yang.
3 thumbs up for Lord Sainsbury there. Okay, what's next on the...
We could talk about unionisation and the labour market.
So massive caveat. This is about a story in America. Europeans love to consume news about America, but we don't actually understand it at all.
I've never been there. To me, it is a fictional country.
But there are kind of I think there are sort of similar things going on in this country. I'm sort of vaguely aware of people trying to unionise some of the bigger architecture offices in this country as well. And I think it's I was thinking about this one because
we should say what's the story that's prompting it. Specifically, there's an architectural firm called Bernheimer that are New York based, I think, and they have successfully, after forming a union, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, this year they've successfully got a collective bargaining agreement within the firm. Yeah. There's an article in Jacobin from one of the organisers, which I will put in the show notes.
Yeah, and it looks like they previously had a failed attempt to unionise their previous workplace.
Unsuccessful attempts at unionising some other, I think, Snøhetta, maybe? Yeah. American office of Snøhetta, and I think...
So I think
shop architects as well. There have been unsuccessful attempts to form unions in some of them.
I don't totally understand what's at stake in unionising an American workplace, because I think the legislation and what it kind of gets you is quite different from what it gets you in this country. I think that it's interesting because kind of historically, architects, we don't do unions because we're professionals.
Yeah,
we're
professionals don't do unions.
Professionals don't, unions are where workers use collective action to pursue, class conflict against employers and secure their rights against them. Whereas professionals, we use collective action to keep other people out of the profession. And the professional status on its own is thought to be enough to kind of secure, the economic and social rewards. And the fact that unionisation is going on is obviously an index of the fact that no longer works in the way that it used to.
Also, that in professional services companies, there isn't an intermediate product really. So if you're employing a lawyer or if you're employing lawyers or accountants or bankers or architects, theoretically what you are doing is you are just getting the services of those people.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are buying toothbrushes from a toothbrush factory, it's a bit of a different...
Yeah.
Notionally, there's a bit of a different relationship because if you're a prominent architect in a firm, you potentially can kind of leave and still be...
Yeah.
There's an awful lot of non-compete and stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of contractually difficult, but like it's a different relationship with the people, the workers have a different relationship notionally with the product. Yeah. Now, in actual fact, it can be kind of more complicated than that, and there's quite a lot of production line, there's quite a lot of donkey work.
Yeah.
But there is a different relationship with professional services workers and mass employment workers, I suppose.
Yeah,
I think that is part of the employment distinction in general.
I should say, like, all power to these people. Like, I wish them well. I mean, I think it's in a way, though, the fact that it's happening is also like indicative of a kind of deeper malaise in the architectural profession and in the economics of the architectural profession, which unfortunately unionisation is not really going to solve. Like, it is really about the aggregate money in, rather than necessarily the division of the spoils within the firm. Like, I mean, some people at the top do earn decently in architecture, but they don't earn that well, and the fact that they earn, sort of moderately well is dependent on everyone else earning very little. Like a part one, that's a undergraduate, like a graduate job in architecture, according to the REBA salary survey this year, is like the part one job is now a minimum wage job. It's now that, and that's the average.
Yeah.
So I don't know what half the practices are doing. Maybe reduced hours or I don't know. I literally don't know. But it means
I guess quite a lot of them are working for free.
Yeah, I guess maybe some of them are working for free. Like when I got my part one job, which was 15 years ago, I was earning more than that.
More than that, not just in real terms, but actually
in nominal terms. Yeah, I think I earned like 23, 24 maybe.
Yeah.
I was working outside London. This would have been 2000. This would be in the recession, 2008. I think I was earning 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone was telling me a funny story the other day. This is about like architecture fee levels. So it's a friend of a friend. I know the person in this story, and he's the project architect on quite a reasonably large project, now completed, sort of public building, with the largest site. It's been quite widely published, and may have won some prizes as well. And he's arriving at work by car, and he drives a second-hand Renault. Someone pulling in at the same time parks next to him in a Bentley, and they get out and fall to talking. And there's some quite aggressive sort of banter going on about the disparity between the cars, until the moment in the conversation where it slips out that he is in fact the project architect, at which point the tone switches immediately to extreme obsequiousness, because the Bentley driver is of course the bricklayer. I mean, this is the thing, like I was thinking about this the other day. Like, it used to be that going to university, having master's degrees, all of these kinds of things were they were things which would sort of generally secure you a bit more income, and they were often indicators of like high cultural capital. And like increasingly, having a master's degree is sort of the opposite in some ways. Like in this country, like actually skipping university sort of suggests that you maybe have like been told a bit more about the way the world's really going and that kind of thing.
This is not my wheelhouse at all, and it's not even architectural, but how much of this do you think is to do with the fact that the class structure hasn't changed, but the number of people going to university has? And how much do you think of it is to do with not just the class structure and the fact that like some people are like really driven to go into successful things and make money, and some people are not. in short, how much is it just sort of shifting around what people do in their youth?
Yeah.
And how much of it is changes in what universities do? I would probably lean a lot towards the university is not, in a lot of cases, it wasn't doing a lot before and it's not doing a lot after.
Yeah.
Except for, I mean, there's some things where if you study it, it will give you a sort of job for life. Like if you become a doctor, you're
probably going to work. Yeah.
If you study engineering in various different things, you'll probably be, you can do that job if you want to for the rest of your life.
Still mostly the law as well. If you get an actual legal qualification to practice as a lawyer.
But those are not very many university courses. And some of the people who do them decide not to do that stuff.
Like it used to be that this was just a gripe of sort of disgruntled old Telegraph readers that too many people were going to university. But increasingly, the wager that was made in expanding university entrance was, people with degrees are generally more productive at that time, and so if we have more of them, it'll make the country richer. But it hasn't seemed to have worked out that way. I mean, I think probably there are various other things going on at the same time.
You can make that work, but you then need an economy that can produce the graduate jobs.
Yeah.
100%.
And some places, there's still a big graduate premium where we are right here.
Yeah.
Unions work really well when you've got a load of people with a skill that's really in demand.
Yeah.
And they're kind of at... But the fact that they're individual against a big buyer of skills puts them at a natural disadvantage. Then they can combine together and then they're more powerful.
Yeah.
Unionization is more difficult when you've got lots of people with a skill who are kind of fundamentally more competing with each other than they are competing with the buyer of the labour.
Which that's classic architects fighting like snakes in a bag,
So that's a kind of a reason that it's more difficult. Like unskilled unionization is historically the kind that has been violent and difficult because it sort of potentially can work, but it works through a more aggressive form of struggling, whereas the very, very successful sorts of unionization are ones where you have a certain number of people who've got a genuine skill. They don't need to keep people out. They've got the skill and they can bargain very efficiently, and that works very well.
Yeah, and there's a big cost to stopping working and that kind of thing.
That sort of, but also they are incentivized to make the system work. Like everyone, it kind of can level out an inequality in scale with something where both people have got something the other one wants and they can kind of reach a negotiated settlement that works. Other forms potentially work, but it's much more difficult.
Okay. Right, let's keep going.
Next.
What's next?
Could do AI. A little bit of relevance maybe to the question about architectural labour.
Yeah,
training as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem. It's a real problem in education because if you could get the computer to do your work for you, wouldn't you? Like the process.
No, because we're doing it for the love of it, Luke.
Well, we're not. But that's the thing. Like the process of learning feels like struggle and feels like suffering a lot of the time. You have to have something which kind of pushes you through the dark times, which often is a certain amount of fear and the fact that there's really no other alternative to doing it. And if you have a computer which can just do it for you, then you just get the computer to do it.
Computers can't produce architecture portfolios yet, but they can do essays.
They can produce the images. Like you get them in architecture portfolios and things. I mean, yeah, I have taught at some places where students come with.
Isn't it like incredibly palpably obvious if an image has been produced by AI in a portfolio?
Of course it is.
Like
But
it's
sometimes
completely falsifiable.
I've taught.
Okay, so you're all pretending. You're all engaged in this pretense that they're doing the work.
Yeah, I know. That's one. To be honest,
this was the joke. This is the sort of Zizek-y joke. Was like you get all of the students to write essays on ChatGPT, and then you get all the teachers to mark the essays with ChatGPT, and then you can kind of dispense with the exercise.
There are products which are being sold to universities right now to do all the marking on AI. There's one called Keith.ai, which was prominently mentioned in a start of the year meeting.
To move away from education and towards AI in practice, I mean, we're coming back. All roads are leading to Zaha Hadid Architects in a strange way because Patrick Schumacher
he's a fan.
has been bigly talking up in the last year or two. The way that ZHA are using AI to generate images of buildings that look like they're kind of in a Zaha style. And then reverse engineer from a 2D perspectival image. Reverse engineering like plans.
Sure. I mean, I think that you can, like, if you know how to design, if you already, it's the same with, this is not very original, it's the kind of the same for all of this stuff. Like, for people who already have a really established skill set and like an advanced understanding, AI can allow them to do all kinds of interesting things. And you know, if you already know how to design, you can use these AI and image generators as a sort of meaningful process of kind of ideation, and sort of, you know, you can sort of see, oh, well, that's sort of interesting, but you can imagine the different thing you could do with it differently. Or you can say, like, you know, it's just like a kind of, it's a sort of fun sort of randomizer or kind of free association device that you can do something with. But it's
that seems reasonable, but it also seems like, okay, we're just putting another thing into the bashing, like it's a novelty in that case. But I had two thoughts, one of which is that I think that's a novelty that can't go on for very long. It's like a novelty. These images are rubbish.
These ones are horrible, aren't they?
But the other one, I think there is a lot of work that in the future is potentially amenable to. There's a lot. I don't know how this really is anymore, but there certainly was a lot of basically tweening construction junctions, detailing and things like that. So we've got how this fundamental system of the construction works, and this is the sort of generic one, right? These things meet in 23 different ways. It's fundamentally the same. Can you do 23 versions of this drawing for these different points? Now, we were definitely being sold on the notion that, like, BIM...
clash detection.
Clash detection. We'll sort that out for you.
The idea of
clash... really has...
No, like the idea of clash detection was like there would be a software a way for the software to start doing some of the things which the architect does, which is this kind of like integration, checking, making sure that the various kind of, you know.
Also, the architect wouldn't mind if they didn't do. I mean, the architect really wouldn't mind if they didn't go, can you check all of the fire escape runs in this hotel are sufficiently short?
I mean, this is why why there's this kind of problem with architecture and fee income generally. Is like the architect is like and everything else responsible person.
Yeah.
So, I
feel that there's a lot of that could be eventually, but you'd need the right incentives and competition in software providers. And it's not obvious how you do that with the sort of AI that we've got now.
It's not at all clear how any of this leads to increased productivity. And in fact, the kind of the onward sort of digitization of construction design seems to be leading to less rather than more productivity, or certainly like flatlining productivity within the kind of the architectural office. Like, I'm not sure anyone is designing buildings easier and faster than they were before.
Do you
all
think
of
that
this
would be different if like entry level architects cost 5 times as much money?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think part of it is...
Because I feel that some of these problems actually are amenable to software solutions.
Yeah.
But you'd need a big incentive for...
capital investment in the technology.
You know, let's say you had a software and Autodesk could sell like, you know, £150,000 a year a terminal thing, and it just churns. It just will do it all.
Yeah,
like
you just go boom boom and it go boom, boom.
like a Bloomberg terminal in a trading investment bank.
That a part 2 costs £80,000 a year or whatever.
Yeah,
I think you would have an economic incentive for that. For someone to provide that software.
Well, because they have done that for software developers, haven't they? You know, who actually are quite expensive. And
and I think it probably is not quite as amenable. But I don't think it's I don't think it's fundamentally impossible for a computer to eventually, through a combination of different sorts of software techniques, we're very So there was an article there that said 41% of practices are using AI. Yeah. And I could not work out for the life of me what AI meant in that context.
Probably writing the design and access statement.
Yeah.
The kind of obvious thing is all these reports which no one reads anyway, might as well.
Because then they're talking about digital twin, which is like a really funny word.
Is like
that's a modelist.
Yeah.
Isn't that, in a way, isn't a digital twin something we used to call a drawing?
Yeah, it is. But this is
fanciful.
Yeah. This is the thing. Like, we had BIM was a complete false dawn. It was meant to it was meant to help automate stuff. And it does automate some things, it makes it easier to kind of generate a new set of drawings or whatever.
Yeah.
But in practice, it seems to me that it's just led to insane over design of all kinds of things which used to be procured perfectly fine with 10 not very detailed drawings on A1.
Yeah.
A project that you would do with 10 not very detailed drawings in a quite short plan of scope of works sort of document now has to be a complete kind of Revit package. Is
where you're asked to. I've had this a couple of times when I was working in architecture, that you'd be asked to resolve a detail and you'd have to draw the whole thing up correctly, and then you'd be asked to go on site where you would explain to them that what they should do is get some pieces of wood and screw them together and sort of whack it in with a hammer.
Yeah.
And I see no evidence of AI being... This is kind of what I talk about in the article, which I will post in the show notes. I see no evidence that AI models are getting anywhere towards being able to resolve actual constructional logic or actual work site logic. And more than that, the way that it's currently being used is a kind of replacement for or somewhere to defer some kind of architectural judgment and taste to. Pat Schumacher is using them just to produce images that kind of give as you say, free associational vibe, and then also create streets. And in the dying days of the Rishi Sunak government, Michael Gove with their big proposals for Cambridge, all of the images of what the 4 times as big city of Cambridge would be they were all just chocolate box AI images in the and not even following the basic rules of Euclidean geometry. Where the gap it seems to be filling at the moment is as somewhere to defer to for something about aesthetics.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a business case for AI for people who think that they might otherwise have to employ an architect to to produce an image or something like that.
It also depends. If by AI what we mean is the thing that's been very interesting in the last few years, which is been a series of generative. That's sort of it's kind of taking old technology. There's a technical basis for it, but basically you get a load of information in, you produce something which can observe from it, and then a sort of parallel model that can chuck stuff out.
Yeah.
It has a technology behind it, which we don't need to, which I don't really understand, but I sort of have the beginning of an understanding of. It seems to be based on the same stuff that it was based on when I was a child, but it is big enough now. They're still using things like perceptrons and stuff and big tensors. That technology, at the moment, could do some things, but it's not a technology which follows logic. Whereas construction, it's not like drawing a picture of a cat. It's kind of because it actually is something that in terms of following a regulation or it is something that is actually quite more like maths. You actually have to understand what it is you're trying to achieve and check against a list of quite specific binary criteria.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that something that will be called AI. Artificial intelligence can mean almost anything.
Yeah.
It basically, I think fundamentally it can mean anything done by a computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that at points in the future, computers will be able to do some of the boring stuff that architects do, but they can't do it now. And that, in a way, I think will actually have a bigger long-term consequence than generative models that produce pictures, which will probably get better and more useful, but they aren't really answering the question that we want the answer to, which feels like it's quite a way off, but also not impossible to me.
Yeah, I mean, people are starting to talk about these kind of agentic behaviours and things like that, where, but I think they're not ready for prime time. But I think those sorts of things might start to.
I would then
save
think
a bit of time.
How does an architectural career progression work when you do have that? Because what do you do? I mean, if we don't really know what to do with a part one, or people are just qualified, what do you do with them in the future when the jobs that slowly the jobs at the bottom of the architectural, we don't, I think historically there was a lot of just like processing drawings, tracing things out. And slowly the
running the blueprint machine was one of my one former bosses reminiscing about, huffing the fumes.
Yeah, and slowly the jobs, entry-level jobs that get you familiar with an architecture office, have been slowly declining. And when mindlessly churning out details is taken away as well, I think we all need to confront what an architectural career looks like a bit more. But it doesn't seem very imminent.
No.
Okay, how many more are we going to do?
I mean, one thing that has been a bit of a viral sensation over the last year or two is the idea that Tehran is the best place in the world right now for mid-rise infill prestige residential projects.
Architectural capital, yeah.
And it's shout out to Philip Oldfield, Sustainable Tall on Twitter, which is no longer the place that anybody goes for anything, but I think is largely responsible for propagating a lot of these images out of Iranian architectural publications and to the internet and making them a bit viral. But
they're building.
People get very excited about them.
Are they doing New London vernacular?
It's a funny. I mean, it's very much
New London vernacular, but with interesting and difficult constructional details and some facade modelling.
It's kind of its own thing. There is some sort of fruity post-Gaudi stuff. There is some, I would say, kind of brick parametricism. There's some New London vernacular. There's a sort of a whole mix of stuff, and it does look like they're building a lot of interesting buildings. And
I guess labour costs are probably quite cheap.
Yeah, labour costs cheap, quite a high skill base. The other explanation that I've seen discussed about it is that if you are a relatively prosperous member of the Iranian bourgeoisie, it's been quite difficult over the last stretch to find places to put your money because of various sanction programs and other stuff, and investing in property in Tehran has been a pretty has attracted, because you can't buy American stocks in the way that you might have been able to in the past.
I was listening to a good podcast about a guy who runs a sort of an index fund targeting the Iranian stock exchange. It sounded quite good. Apparently, they return a lot of cash to investors. It's pretty bubbly. Lots of.
Is this the same podcast? It was about it was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. But I think there's obviously interesting stuff going on there. Yeah, I think
some problems.
Yeah, but yes, it seems like a large and complicated country. It does. I like to see these little projects as well, and it's nice to see, because I just don't really have. I don't really know what Tehran's like, other than there's a few historical sites. It's very big.
It's I quite like to go, but I don't really support some of the current politics of the country. It seems, to say the least.
I mean, one of the main problems with going there, to me, seems to be that it makes it more difficult to go to the United States of America. But that's not really a point of concern for you, George, because as you've already said, it's a fictional country. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd quite wouldn't mind going to America at some point, but I guess I mean, I'm sort of on the way to getting another passport that doesn't mind about Iran. So
that's good thinking. Yeah,
that might solve. Probably don't have that in there.
Yeah.
I mean, other things we can throw. We can leave Tehran there. I kind of want to talk about the sphere.
Oh,
this is getting back to America, the fictional country.
Yeah.
But this
I don't mean fictional in any bad way. It's
I
just
know,
Wonderland.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
You're like Franz Kafka, aren't you?
Yeah. I haven't got off the boat yet.
Yeah.
So this big project by Studio Populous has been sort of 4 years in the making, and it came online at the end of 2023.
Yeah.
And it cost like $2 billion to build.
Yeah.
And it is in Las Vegas, City of Lights. Look, we're learning from Las Vegas. Yeah. And it is literally just a massive...
This, I think, might genuinely be a duck.
They wanted to build a little one in Stratford, didn't they?
They did.
They did. It was such a shame they've decided not to.
Well, yeah, I think the main reason that the British planning system decided not to was that it was going to have 24-hour advertising coming out of it. But given how much bright 24 advertising there is in that part, anywhere near the North Circular anyway. This is why there's no growth and productivity growth in the UK economy.
We should have had that. We should have had that.
Isn't Stratford also like the prime location of building the future dystopia? In London at the moment.
Yes. Well, at least until Old Oak Common probably comes online, that's going to be the successor.
Yeah, I don't know how horrible that dystopia is, but it's definitely a strange one.
So what is it? I mean, there's no way that anyone doesn't know. But it's a massive sphere.
It's a big,
totally covered in.
Well, sort of snow globe. It's not.
It's a snow globe.
Yeah,
it's totally covered in LEDs, LCD system on the outside and on the inside. It's a skin. It's a total skin of pure screen. Yeah. And you can broadcast anything on it.
Yeah.
And then one of the things I find so funny about it is that it's this totally incomparable kind of performance venue.
Yeah.
And then who have they actually had playing in it?
They had U2.
They had U2.
Yeah.
They've had Fish. They've had Dead and Company. And they've had the Eagles.
The Eagles.
And it seems to be screaming out for Disney on Ice.
Yeah.
Well, that seems very Las Vegas.
Well, they could have had
that is the model.
But I mean, it's part of There's also the sort of ABBA experience, which, albeit not a massive sphere, is a similar kind of
unbelievably successful, and lots of people like it. I've had many conversations with people who are amazed at how great the ABBA experience was.
Yeah, you go into a space and watch a 3D video, and everyone's paying like hundreds of pounds, and it goes every night.
It's making so much money.
They think it's going to run forever.
Yeah,
it's going to be like
just coining it in. Amazing. I'm really impressed.
The Saudis want to build one as well, but theirs is square. It's
the cube.
The cube, yeah. It's a cube.
Really? Is that some section of the line?
I'm not sure that one's going to have a digital display
on the inside. It doesn't have one on the outside, but on the inside, it's just the inside.
It probably makes sense because no one's going to be outside inside.
It's a cube. It's a big cube.
Well, I don't know how much longer people are going to be outside in Las Vegas for.
Build a big dome over it and air conditioning.
What we need is a bigger sphere.
I don't really know what to say about it other than that it is like. I was thinking about it. It is actually a historical marvel.
Yeah.
It is actually like an astonishing achievement of like engineering, and it's the kind of thing that, if you grabbed someone from 1st century AD Rome, and you said, you think imperial pomp and grandeur and spectacle.
Oh, those Romans are very easy to impress.
And like,
are you feeling jaded about this public executions?
I just feel quite sad that the extent of the cultural form that we're able to project onto this epochal spectacular achievement is like, I mean, on the Wikipedia page, like a smiley face.
They make a big smiley face. It looks at the planes as they're coming into land.
Surely we can do something better.
Yes, I mean, sure,
thing.
Yeah, no, yes.
Than hosting U2.
The Tarkovsky of the giant the giant sphere. Yes, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I agree. I mean, stadia in general are getting pretty mad. All of these ones with completely movable pitches, and
Did anything happen to that Herzog and Meuron building one under brick?
No, the Chelsea one got cancelled because that was a project of the former owner.
Oh,
and he cancelled it after he was placed under sanctions. In
a bit of pique.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it probably wasn't really going to be practical to fund a major building in London while you're under sanctions.
No, I can see some problems with that. Yeah. I mean, movable stage, that is something that the Romans did, isn't it?
They filled it with water. They did
well.
naval battles in it, as is very artfully depicted in the new Gladiator movie.
Oh, nice. Have they done UFC in there yet? Or
In the Sphere?
Yeah.
I'm sure they will. In Donald Trump's America, there's no way they don't do UFC in the Sphere.
Yeah.
Before we finish, I had some questions about what I would like to know about the now,
but
don't know at all. I would really like to know what architectural solutions or thinking is going on in how to make the already built insane new cities of China. What do you do after they're built, and what do you do with them, and how do you live and inhabit these now inhabited spaces, and what the cities expand, they draw in people from the countryside. It's happened in lots of places at lots of times, and they become really big, and then there's a existing infrastructure of that city, and then over time it becomes a different sort of urban condition from this first settlement. There's various problems of architecture today. There's how to make not horrible buildings, but also what people are going to do with these cities of motorways and towers in the future. How I understand how they're built and first a little bit about how they're first inhabited, but I'd be really interested to know about how they become another thing or what people do next.
Drones, robot cars.
Yeah, okay. But
the solutions are always more products, aren't they?
I don't know. I've seen lots of pictures of these places.
Yeah.
But I've not been there, and I don't really understand the sort of sociology of them. And in fact, I would like to know about what's going on in the massive development of the not English speaking world, and if there are people trying to. There's obviously a lot of people trying to get on with it, but if there are people who are trying to think about what you can do with it. The movement from the country to the city is essentially through history been going in one direction.
Yeah.
Certainly in the history since the new techno economy, in the last 200 years or whatever. And the cities kind of expand massively, and then they have this state. And it's been different in each generation how to respond to it. I'm quite interested about what to do with European suburbia. I think empowered designers should be able to make modern buildings not horrible. It doesn't seem impossible. It seems like a combination of cultural and political problems, actually, that need to be applied to the current technology of building.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like caveat to what I said before about that, good architects today obviously do make nice buildings. I didn't mean to.
They do. There's loads of nice buildings.
Lots of nice ones, but the median building is not very good.
And there's also a lot more building around. Building per person in this country has just gone up forever.
Yeah.
Line just goes up, and it just never stops going up. So that does seem to be a reality. Yeah. Not in every geographical location, but in net, it just seems to increase the amount of building per person.
So the broadcast, the forecast is more buildings.
More buildings.
More buildings, more cities.
More. There's definitely going to be more buildings. Some places will have more cities, but probably I think we're in a universe where most of the stars have already come into existence. There will be more. Some will grow, but there will be more and more buildings probably.
Well, I mean, on that note,
thanks a lot to Matt for putting together all the.
As I said, extremely thin research.
Yeah, there's a big list of things to talk about and lots of helpful links. So that was definitely something.
And there'll be a load of links in the description just in case our discussion was not sufficiently clear.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for listening to the podcast this year. A special thanks to everyone who subscribes to the Patreon and supports the podcast. Very much appreciated. And whenever you're actually listening to this, have a great new year continuation of
it will be coming out sometime in the gap between Christmas Day and New Year's Eve would be my intention, and then in January we'll be marching on with SMLXL Return to Cool House.
I think we've already recorded about 5 hours of it.
Okay, well, if you are listening to this when we plan to release it, then Happy New Year and have a great 2025.
Thank you so much for listening.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.